Welcome to the Doomer Optimism podcast. Today's episode, I think, is a bit unorthodox and interesting for a couple of reasons. So, it was actually recorded election night 2024, James, Ashley, and I, and we were talking about, what we thought was the future of Doomer Optimism in the context of the state of the world, and the context that we didn't know what the election results were going to be. And so it never got released. And the reason it never got released is because I ended up stepping away from Doomer Optimism a few days later, and it kind of became a lost episode. Recently, I've been thinking that I think it should be released. Again, just to kind of get a sense of where we were at that time. The world has changed quite a bit, I think, since then. And also just, personally, you might be seeing more of me again in the future. And so, if I'm going to start recording again, doing interviews, I thought it'd be interesting to release this episode. So I hope you enjoy. Take care.
Okay, everybody, we are recording on election night. This is the Doomer Optimism podcast. I'm here with two of my closest collaborators, James Pogue and Jason Snyder. And today we're going to talk a little bit about, I guess, like a sort of state of Doomer Optimism. We've got the arm of the podcast. We've been doing these events. The podcast was more or less started with Jason. These events more or less started with James. They keep sort of building on to each other into this network, and we're just constantly getting these signals from people like, how do I get involved? What are you turning this into? And or like, this is a really great podcast. I feel not alone. And or this has been a really great event and I feel really not alone having attended it. So we're just going to riff on sort of like what we're thinking, what we initially thought, what we're thinking this might build into, and just kind of think out loud. So I don't have a specific question. I don't know, maybe other people, either one of you want to say something to start.
Well, I'll jump in and say that, for people listening, like the genesis of this particular podcast episode was partly that Jason and I have never even like been on a Zoom
together. Yeah.
And so like, I'm just excited. Like actually, yeah, hey, I'm exactly. I've admired you from afar. This with you. Yeah. I'm like, you're like one of the people who made me like stay on Twitter when I first got one. I was like, if there's guys like this, like, I'm just curious about this platform. And then, okay, now this is in a long riff, but it will build into sort of what we're talking about. Like, I was waging my own like sort of solitary little war against whatever we want to call this thing, through like the shadow mechanisms of like coded stuff in the media, which some people have followed and some people will not care about. And Ashley, again, via Twitter, kind of picked up on the codes I was throwing out, brought me into this movement that we can call DO. The DO is not the only component of, I would argue. We can talk about that as well. And then very quickly, I personally had the experience of DO like spiraling into something that was beyond a meme, beyond a Twitter corner, beyond anything. And so I'll say, since it is election night and we're looking at the abyss, and since I'm going to go over there later, because I'm very curious, I'm going over to Peter Thiel's house later. And I mentioned that because the way I knew this thing was real was I went there and I was trying to convince him that some of the stuff that we think and talk about is not meaningless hippie bullshit, essentially. And he went, "Oh, are you one of those Doomer optimists?" And I thought, well, whatever you think of Peter Thiel, something happened here. Like something happened here that this is a word in his ears, and I thought that was special. Even if he's not a person I agree with on most, my sort of outlook about the future and things like that. And so my only point being that a year later now, I think we've sort of like reached a point where people are writing about this thing. People are contacting us constantly going, what is this thing? Where is it going? And the genesis of the whole conversation was try to figure out what the answer to that is, because none of us, I think, for any of this. And that would be my spiel.
Jason?
Well, interesting. When we started, we were pretty clear, at least we were saying this, and I think we were believing that we believed it, that it wasn't a movement. It was a structure of feeling. And, we kind of, but at the same time, we talked as if it was a movement as well. And so I don't think our understanding of what it was very clear, and it's still not very clear. I think when you started doing events, Ashley, and James, uh, and we started having meetups, then it's like, well, if it's not a movement, what do you call it? Right?
Yeah.
Is it the structure of feeling that happens to, manifest itself in meet space once in a while? Or what is it? Um, for me personally, like my main involvement with this thing has been through the podcast. Uh, I just never really leave home, and so I don't really.
And we also attract your type of people who
Yeah.
never leave, and we can never get them to come, which is
Right.
kind of cool because it's part of what I don't want to interrupt too much, but part of why it's not a movement is that we've got a lot of really cantankerous people who cannot agree with one another and wouldn't be part of a movement if you said it was one, even if they agree with everything. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and so I haven't been part of like the scene in terms of like the meetups and that kind of the salon type atmosphere. The scene for me has been in front of a computer screen, recording when I probably should be doing other things, right? And having my family like, what is he doing? Like, how is this contributing to the family kind of thing? No, they're not really. They're supportive, but uh I will say that it has manifested in real life in a few positive ways, like people I've met who have came and visit, and that's nice. People who live nearby, we've started developing kind of a regional network through the podcast. So that's been really positive for me. But in terms of like the larger, like, are we going to become a movement? Are we going to become like a political force? Um, that's still very vague for me, and I think that there's a lot of dangers uh, in that. But at the same time, I feel like we do have a mess. We do have something to say, and I think we do have something important to say. And so it's always been a conflict with me of like, do I just need to back out of this thing because I don't know what it's becoming, and it's kind of out of my control, and I don't necessarily agree with all aspects of it, right? But what we're talking about, these conversations we're having, I think are, really important, and they're not something I really hear anywhere else.
Yeah. So okay, I want to just back up a little bit and maybe riff on this for a second, which is part of before Doomer Optimism was ever a thing, or before like any of us got together, I think the three of us and many of the people who have been drawn to this like meme sphere, whatever, have a kind of world historical perspective that we're in an inflection point in history where there's this sort of material reality butting up against, I guess like the software of our culture that's there's a big mismatch happening on multiple levels. And so we've talked a lot about like this John Michael Greer quote, collapse now and avoid the rush, but just kind of like thinking about preparing for a future with some more material limits or limitations on like exponential growth. And if you prepare for that in advance, you can avoid some of the ghastly outcomes of other fallen civilizations or empires that maybe didn't see these things in advance. And so like, I want to just clearly state here that my explicit intention, not just with Doomer Optimism, but a lot of the stuff I do with my life is specifically thinking about, I kind of see this thing coming. This has happened a lot of times in history. How do we prepare and also enjoy a lot of the like more beautiful and beneficial aspects of those kind of slower and more in line with nature livelihoods anyways, but also thinking like how to prepare and how to get other people to sort of think about where we're at in history. And I don't know, maybe both of you want to riff on that a little bit too, to just like frame this intention historically or at a point in history.
Well, I mean, you suggest kind of the elephant in the room, both because of the night we're recording, which before I will admit I thought was maybe like a crazy choice. And now that we're doing it, I think is quite a good one because we are in an abyss. And I guess my presupposition for this grouping of thought movement thing, podcast, whatever this thing is, my presupposition is that actually like kind of the conversations we are having within it should not really be predicated that much on who wins the election. And like, so it's kind of a perfect time to be recording as like everyone else is freaking out. Like those of us who actually really care about this thing and share this worldview, it really shouldn't matter that much. I say that a little bit to address the elephant deep within the room, because I don't know if anyone's really exposed to this stuff except us and maybe especially like me and Ashley. But for those of us who are peripheral to politics and also involved in this thing, there's this kind of big question of like, a lot of people on the right now are really into like material limits and like talking about decline of empire and stuff like that. And it's really, really easy to plug and play would have this thing feel a little bit like it's just another one of these spaces where actually a lot of the same people from Twitter and literally from presidential administrations and things like that gather. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But that, I think part of the reason we wanted to get together and talk is like that to me doesn't really feel like the point of this thing. And I think the way that the three of us would have come together implicitly, like just if we met in a hayfield somewhere and thought, hey, you're a cool person to talk to, is like the left-right divisions are not like ordering mechanisms that we use to sort people in our lives that much. And I mean, I don't know. I think there need to be a few hard conversations about that, just in terms of like moving forward in this kind of sphere of like, especially Twitter driven conversation where literally there's an algorithm, there's a machine driven algorithm driving people to the right now. You could argue that happened to the left before, sure, whatever. But right now that conversation is being driven really hard to the right. And a lot of people in our sphere are, I would argue, getting audience captured, where there's things that the people on the right are saying, and I would include myself within this.
Yeah, me too.
People are not looking at those guys being like, I can't wait to get my uniform at the deportation camps. And you know who you are, those of you who are listening. Like, if you're looking for a sharp uniform and a cool gun to serve in a deportation camp, like, you're just not my friend. Like, and that's not a right left thing. That's I don't like people who want to wear a sharp uniform and serve in a camp. Like, and
or bootlickers.
Honestly, a lot of us are in spaces where people like that talk and do not get checked. And like, one thing I would like out of this conversation is maybe we should figure out a way to check that, at least in this space. And then everybody else can figure out their own life outside. That's fine.
Well, it's been interesting. I mean, Ashley and I have had tension throughout this because we started this kind of with the idea that it was different access, different political access, if it was political, at all, right? It was like, localist, globalist, left, right, and there was like left, right sensibilities on both sides of kind of the localist or cosmo-localist spectrum. Ashley, my sense is that you have drifted right throughout this process, and I have been, sometimes a little bit unsettled by it, but at the same time understanding where you're coming from. And seeing your point of view. And even like just, one indicator is we had like this one large group chat on Twitter early on, and it was just becoming chaotic. Like we were feeding it. We're like, this is wild. Let's just keep adding people, just random crazy people. And it was just becoming insane. And at a certain point, the thing just blew up and split up into kind of a more right and a more left camp of DO, you could say, at least on Twitter. And so now we've had these separate group chats basically since then. What I will say though is I think with the podcast itself, I think, and from my perspective, if I've been unsettled by what's happening on Twitter sometimes, the podcast I feel like has really maintained integrity. I've said before that Twitter is a shit show, but I really stand by the podcast. And the podcast has more left conversations, more right conversations, and heterodox conversations that you can't classify at all. But and people who come on who, if they can't, different guests who, if they saw each other in real life, would probably try and kill each other. But we're placed at platforms, all of these different views, but with the coherence of what our original kind of vision was, right? Of, what is really valuable to people culturally, physically, tangibly, in their lives, and where can we find productive common ground without being a mushy centrist?
Yeah. So, okay. So there's some tensions that I've been having to navigate this whole time that I just want to like say out loud. One of them being from the very beginning, people were like, what are you? You know, are you left or are you right? And we would get like far left people accusing us of being fascists and far right people accusing us of being communists. And I was just like, to me, what was really, really essential was to be able to model like a convivial, open dialogue, like a real one. I know everyone like uses this heterodox term now, but like a real ability to like sit with something unpleasant and or challenge it when it is actually like kind of beyond the scope of your acceptability, but also like, you know, not just easily put people into boxes. And so like these events have been really good at modeling that. But then I sit here looking at these events and I'm like, these people like they don't have that much in common. Like actually in terms of their material interests or like goals, there's like the ortho bros who are like working on something in Georgia. And then there's like, you know, like there's just all these like weird people who have kind of come under this umbrella. And something that was central to my dissertation work, which informs how I think about organizing still, is that people need something specific and grounded in material to work on, not this like vague, and this is why I don't like the movement framing, this like vague, like we're like staging a revolution and it's an ideological revolution and it's the degrowth revolution or it's the Catholic land movement revolution. I know I'm gonna get people mad at me for saying that, but like it's just I think these ideologically captured movements end up just spiraling into purity policing. And then like, it just becomes this thing like, well, I'm more degrowth than you and you're less so. And so like my vision, if we want to like start thinking about that, is if we're trying to think about actually like solving this problem of collapse, what you really need is super hyper committed to place coalitions that are like deeply loyal to one another. And so like example from the dissertation is the chicken keepers in Chicago who like were all big into chicken keeping, didn't really know each other well. And then they, you know, there's this city council person who comes in and tries to ban it. And everybody kind of is like, oh, hell no, this is our material interest. We want to be able to keep chickens. We've always been able to. And now we're a self-identified coalition. And we don't agree about everything, but we do agree about chickens, and we're gonna like fight on this issue, and we're gonna build a coalition around that thing. That to me like is something that's really exciting because it could be like a whole parallel like sort of, you know, political coalition building thing where we're not even necessarily top down. We're just sort of like being supportive of these different groups who are doing things that are like sort of in our wheelhouse that we agree with and we can support in some way. You know a little bit more about the levers of power, James, that you could like maybe think about how this meshes.
I wanted to speak to one thing that I think this raises, like, which is like for any, I mean, we talk about this like the heterodox nature of like the three of us and maybe our views, but more so like our friend group and the people we've been in touch with over the past few years is that we talk about it as a heterodox group of people, which I think is completely fair. And then there's this kind of confusion when you talk about heterodoxy today, because heterodox also came to mean a thing that is not heterodox at all, that is like a worldview that is like basically very neoliberal and like Clinton or Bushite, but like you can say the R word or something, like it just like and suddenly like that became what heterodox means. So if you are attempting to create a genuinely heterodox space and worldview and collection of people to do stuff in the world, like you're caught up in this kind of like weird contrast of terminology that is just like a sort of product of our times. And I think that has been something that I wouldn't say DO has suffered from at all. As a matter of fact, I think we've almost benefited from it, because being genuinely heterodox also sort of gets you attention from these like hyper powerful media organizations that are
seriously
fake heterodox and like are in that space. That's fine, whatever, it is what it is. But the thing that I would say is that my kind of like going forward like desire sort of principle would be that it should not be subsumed by the heterodoxy industrial complex, and that it should genuinely heterodox. And that's just, I think, like a good line to like attempt to achieve. And it's nothing perfect, which goes to my second point, which is like to me, like going back to the whole left, right, did Ashley move right? That kind of thing. Like, yeah, I mean, I think this is stuff that we all wrestle with. Like, I've been going back and reading histories of the 60s, trying to figure out like why I, who grew up in the households that came out of these 60s, didn't really like that stuff. And it doesn't really have anything to do with the left per se. It has to do with being extremely doctrinaire. It has to do with like that thing that happens when words stop meaning words and they start being like shibboleths.
Yeah.
Of course, we all saw, in the years 2014 to 2020, we could say like definitely like the liberal left in America like kind of got into that space where like people started saying words as signifiers more than like things that expressed meaning in a material reality, whatever, right? And like it was easy to drift away from that. To me, like going back to the 60s where that was much bigger. That was a much bigger thing. People forget. People forget how little and not powerful the left is in America today. Like that was really the thing that broke it. And that was the thing, the movement, when people said the capital M movement, what killed it was the 70s when people started saying, no, you're not going with us on this thing. Okay, you're out.
Yeah.
And that would be, I think, the defining reason why this should not become a movement. Going to your thing, Ashley, just like, I think the distinction between a movement in that sense and like a thing that can make real things happen in the world and can have even organizational structures and like can honestly even get people paid. I don't even know if that's a thing that anybody wants, but there's a distinction between that kind of thing and like a grouping of people who share similar worldviews and values who get together to work on a project, right? And we can to some degree be both without having rules and regulations and things that you're not allowed to say and things that you are allowed to say. And I obviously that's like the kind of, you can almost say like the political gold that America mined for many years. Like that's the kind of like, that's the kind of special lane that like allowed American democracy to function and flourish during the times that it has, is like when you're finding that middle zone. And that seems like a decent model for some Americans to try to learn from.
Yeah, and I would add that, I think finding the middle zone is not about triangulating of like, okay, this is what the right's doing, this is what the left's doing, this is what the techno-optimists are doing, this is what the Luddites are doing. Let's find this kind of like clever, compromise or something. I don't think that's what it is. I think, and we've talked about this from the beginning, it's what are things that we can collaborate on that we care about, and we started being very practical. Like, we started Doomer Optimism at the height of COVID. Collapse was on a lot of people's minds. And so we focused a lot on like farming, homesteading, things of that nature. Over time, things started to feel a little bit better, calmer, more stabilized. A lot of that energy, I think, in the culture was getting drained out. It was becoming ironic. The postmodern treatment was applied to it. And suddenly it was kind of a joke. And so, for us, it was like, okay, well, what does this mean besides get some chickens, right? What does this mean to collaborate, not just on, say, farming or natural building or, these crunchy things, but to collaborate on, cultural artifacts as well, right? Donald started having his book club thing, which, where is Donald, by the way? We need to, that guy's out in
He texted me today. He texted me a photo of a book about a small town in Ohio from apparently the 50s, with no context.
Yeah, he also sends me letters and texts me every once in a while.
Okay, good. I'm glad to know
he's
that
still out there.
Hi, Donald. We miss you. I miss you.
Sometime for the first time, he should host one of these.
Yeah, for the first time.
For the first time.
He would be a good host.
But and I think, just in the last couple of months, so this summer I was really having a DO existential crisis. Like we kind of took a break. I didn't record for about 3 months. A lot of stuff was going on this summer in my life, and I was like, do I really want to stay on with this? Is it really worth it? And I went back and forth. I almost jumped out, Ashley. I don't know if I told you that, but
no.
Thinking about it. And I had this inexplicable reason to stay on, but I think in the last just few weeks, I think starting with you and Nate's interview with Small Town Mayor, and then last night I just interviewed a candidate for county commissioner in my county, and suddenly I was like, a light came on. And it's like, we've been neglecting politics. Maybe because we didn't want to, the national political conversation is just so surreal, but we've been, neglecting local politics, right? And that's something that I think really has some potential for DO to get involved with. You know, reaching out, having, because both of these conversations, these, mayor, county commissioner, like both of them, they weren't thinking in Republican or Democrat terms. They're thinking about like, let's get shit done terms. Like, let's find common ground terms. Like, that's literally their job.
Yep.
And, so, the thought came to me just today is like, one direction I like to see us go in is to, engage these kinds of people who are doing politics, real politics on the ground. They're in touch with their constituents, day in, day out. And let's start building up a network of, a local political network that's cosmo-local, right? That's networked across these localities, but it is focused on local politics. And that's something I feel like could be, besides also having a network kind of set of projects in various regions and people getting together for barn raising, so to speak. This could be like the other side of that coin, right? Of like the local policy, the local outreach, things of that nature. And that seems to be a very promising path forward that can kind of have a bottom up, trickle up kind of, effect, maybe.
Yeah. So I was starting to see this. Every time we have these events, I'm like, this was so fun, but what is the point? Like, I'm always just like, what is the point? Like, what are the material things that are coming out of this? And maybe it's a little spreadsheet brained of me to be like, what are the outcomes and impacts? Because I think a lot of this stuff too is just like, once people meet each other, they connect, and then like kind of cool and amazing things happen with the human spirit with that anyways. But I had this really like epiphany at the last Wagon Box event when James, you organized the session with Peter Allen and Hal Herring on ag policy. And I was just kind of like, whoa, we actually have both Peter and Hal have independently told us that they feel extremely lonely. They are some of the smartest ecological and most practical, most practiced ecological, practitioners, whatever, out there. And they're like so lonely, and everybody calls them names. Everybody calls them not the right kind of environmentalist for the times. And you get these two brains together who are like deeply concerned and have expansionary visions for what like North American ecology can look like. And you get them together and they like think through the practical realities of how you could get a whole regenerative like landscape across America. And I was just thinking like, God, this is just like some secret conversation that 30 people are listening to right now, but could be absolutely transformational if we harnessed it somehow. And I was also thinking, just like with my left conservatism article, that there's a subsidiarity thing going on here where we could support like the small town mayor, the Wendell Berry mayor, and this Ohio River Valley project that we heard that's like Regen Ag Ohio River Valley. But we don't have to like have that strong of a say on what they do. Like they know their context better than we would. We don't need to have like super strong controls over it. That makes no sense really. Instead, it's just like, do you more or less comport with the vision? Then we want to be supportive of you. And like on that scale, whatever scale they're working on, if the scale of the project is the Ohio River Valley, or if it's a tiny little town in Texas, or if it's the whole United States, like each scale needs to be lined up with the question or political question we're trying to answer. And I feel like we have something to say in a lot of places. And we have this amazing network of people who are like super practiced and practical, very smart, and super lonely, and are just waiting to get organized, like waiting for somebody to organize them and invite them. That's my sense right now.
Yeah. So just for people who haven't gone to one of these events and heard my spiel about this, because I reprise it every time. I mean, the kind of like nuts and bolts of it actually is that like, the Wagon Box events were engineered to some degree with this guy Hal Herring in mind, because he's this old friend of mine, lives out in Montana, crotchety, one of the greatest outdoorsmen. Literally, I'm not kidding. One of the great American outdoorsman, and also one of the great sort of like Western land policy knowers that exists in this country. And like I say that I'm just to my own horn for a moment, I'm pretty good at the Western land ecology stuff. I'm pretty good at the policy knowing stuff. And how I just sit down with him and it's just like it's something else. And Peter Allen, people have heard on the podcast.
I feel the same way.
And Peter Allen, he is someone who he opens up new windows into your thinking, like even if you think about this stuff all the time. And, it was really special to put those two people in a room. And the joke was that, at the thing, we introduced them and they just didn't stop talking. And I would keep like coming by to get a beer or something. And Hal would be like, what do you think the whitetail population was back then? And Peter Allen would have an answer and they would just keep, and it was just something truly special. And Hal, he thanked me so much after that event. And he was like, man, it was like you were dialing my direct number. And he'd never felt together with people. And then to speak, so I guess I say that because what I think one thing I would like for everyone to feel coming out of this, and I mean like everybody who's been involved in this whole thing since you guys started it, is like, you've already created like a new, I don't know if it's a new center, but a new pole, a new way of thinking, a new like mode that people can come to and be like, I've been thinking this way forever. I'm not a hateful person. I don't dislike this other thing, but this is the stuff that I do like. And I would love to be with other positive people. And suddenly it's like, it becomes a network, and the network is not to be, I mean, we can be talking about mycelium or we can be talking about Twitter. The network has its network effects. And like one of the cool things about being a network instead of a movement is that the nodes of the network you don't like that much, ideally, if it's a well-built thing, like some of them nodes, like they just won't get a lot of attachment. And like we don't have to do the policing at the edges and say like, hey, you shouldn't have said that, you're gone. Because a lot of people just won't engage with them. And we've seen that. That's a very positive thing, I think. That like I don't think we necessarily give ourselves enough credit for, just being like, okay, I'm just gonna stop texting you back, man. Sorry. And I think we've seen that, and I think we've been good at it, almost better than we maybe acknowledge.
Like there's actually a lot of unspoken things that went really well at all these events that I don't even know that like I intentionally planned, but just like kind of between all of us set it up like vibes based, like this is kind of how we're doing this, and people picked up on it as like it wasn't never like very intentional, it was all very intuitive, which was also cool.
And I just say again, like for me personally, like I feel like if I needed to have a barn raising for the first time probably in my life, like as a wandering person who's never lived anywhere very long, all that kind of stuff, I probably could throw a barn raising pretty easy now. And that's like because of this thing. And if you can do that, then you could, for example, like, so Peter Allen in this talk, I guess I'm kind of advocating a little bit like a celebration of the non-material aspects. I do think there's a kind of thing of just build the network and good things will happen. But we did do this policy talk, me, Hal, and Peter. And one of the good ideas Peter had, I mean, me and Hal can talk about Western policy stuff that we can work on well with the network. You can just get people, plug and play, call that congressman. Let's pass RAWA. Like, let's pass these Restore Wildlife Acts. Like, if we get 65 people because we have a DM group that we say we want to call that and make that happen, that doesn't have to be a movement. That doesn't have to be.
It's one thing. It's one issue and you just push on it.
But we've got enough people who, if they care, they can call that New Mexico congresswoman who's not voting for it. And 65 calls, of which 25 are constituents, you're going to move people on these smaller things. Like that's super, super, super possible. And then Peter had this idea of, hey, around me, there's all these rich people with laptop jobs who are just buying 20, 25 acre farms and not working them. And there's all these people who want a farm coming out of Madison, learning, like with an MFA in farming or whatever you get. And like, he was like, so how do we build a system so that they can get on that land? And like, you're telling me we couldn't do that? Like, we actually, like, and he has a mechanism actually that's already like in place. There's a mechanism also in my hometown where this is already happening in Southern Ohio. But like with the tech people we have and the network we have, like, again, it doesn't have to be a rule that everybody does it, but you could start building this stuff. And that seems to fit within the not a movement, but a network kind of frame.
Yeah, I was thinking also in the terms of a network. I mean, building on that, is it like a heterodox values-based network? Like, is it just like because the network has some kind of agency, it has some kind of will, and maybe this is a meaningful distinction, or maybe it's not. But, are we thinking of it as a network that has a will to power or a prefigurative network that like build the network and good things will happen, like you said? Is it just about building this network, creating these relationships, basically, these, I guess, clusters of relationships that are networked with each other across the internet, but the clusters are more in real life as well. Are we building this and waiting for world events to kind of demonstrate the necessity of us jumping in to fill in, some kind of void, or is our goal to like take power, so to speak, right? Like, is it more of like the passive, like, be like water and water is eventually unstoppable, or is it be like fire?
Well, okay, fine. Since Ashley threw a dig at me, I mean, so this is funny for me. I'm curious to hear both of your thoughts on this in my sort of exploration of power, because contrary to what Ashley might suggest, like I'm not I'm not like a striver for things that give me power. I like to be around it because I find it very interesting. And I find like the more you know about it, the more you can explain the world. Like that is definitely, to my discomfort, that has been my experience. My experience has been you can understand everything that's happening on your county level to like this whole sort of like novelistic degree, and actually like just like people in NATO are going to make decisions that mean that you have no agency. And I find that actually a very scary and horrifying thing to be true, but that has been my experience. But by nature, I am an observer and a step back and watcher and a be water person. And so even doing these events has been like hell for me. Like it's because it's so far out of my comfort zone. I don't like it one bit. And then I leave and I feel really rewarded. So I'm only saying that because I think there's an argument for those of us, maybe Jason, you and I are more like this, who are like more by nature be water.
Yeah.
To like explore what the fire could be. Like that's what I'm pushing myself towards, like to see what you could do when you are trying to be the fire. And it sounds like Ashley, who's like, well, so what's the material outcome of this project? Maybe is on the other end of that.
Last night I went to this Bulls game and they took away my 4-year-old's umbrella, and there was no way for me to get rid of the umbrella or put it somewhere safe without forfeiting my ability to go in the game, because once they scan the ticket, you can't leave and come back. So there was just no solution. My 4-year-old was just crying. And it was just the pure machine. And I'm just like, this is such bullshit. So I like take the umbrella and I throw it behind a garbage can. And Pat's like, you need to like get it under control. We're going to get kicked out. I'm like, I don't give a shit if I get kicked out. I'm keeping my dignity at this game. And then the lady's like, I'm taking it from you, whatever. And then the 4-year-old's crying and she's just like, I'll get a new one, whatever. And then we walk out and I go up to the lady and I'm like, do you have the umbrella? And she's like, they took it away and housekeeping cleaned everything out. I'm like, I hope you feel good about yourself. And then I walk out and there's a garbage can right there. And the umbrella is sitting inside the garbage can. And I take it out and I was like wielding it in front of my kids, like, we got this back. Like, we're fighting the machine, whatever. And I was just like, you do not let these people take away your dignity, blah, 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 whatever. That's my intention. When I see something that's wrong, I just like, I can't abide it. I just, and this is like such a stupid example, but this is like kind of my orientation. Like when I see eco-modernist stuff, or I see like environmental, like policymakers talking behind closed doors, like let's get meat out of the hands of like poor children in their school lunches. Like, I'm just like, this is wrong. Like, this is just a wrong orientation. And it's so top down. Or like, let's surveil people's license plates so that they can't move around in space because of like, climate change or whatever. And I'm just like, so there are some things where I'm like, I absolutely will fight this, like on a political level. I think it's wrong. And I will do anything I can to talk or do whatever I can to be against it. But,
Let me ask this question. In terms of the network, if we're thinking of ourselves as a network, at what scale, are we more like fire? At what scale are we more like water? And one thing I'll
Yeah, that's a
suggest
good question. Yeah.
is that if we're not going to be a movement, then we're saying at the, say, national scale, we're not going to be like fire, because that's what a movement is trying to do, at least if it's a national movement. But I can see, so the network itself, the national and international perhaps network is like water, but different clusters within the network can be more like fire, right? Like
Yeah.
people mobilizing, getting together, fighting the machine, right? And we all have Twitter, and so we all sometimes comment on larger scale issues and things of that nature. But
Fight with
that's
people.
kind of like
Not as much as Ashley.
No,
Yeah.
nobody.
mostly Ashley.
Ashley
fighting
throws
with
herself
people.
into the she would
Just get out there in the arena, people, Yeah, no, I think this is a good question. And I think that part of like one of my other strong opinions is like it's actually really weird for me to have an opinion even about like the Catholic land movement, even though I just had an opinion earlier about it. Like, let them do their thing. You know what I mean? Like, it's not up to me what's happening in like New York, rural New York. Like, let them do it and let them practice it. Like, I've got a real strong, like, why do I have to have a say over? It's a very like federalist approach, like people are allowed to experiment and try things. And I think if things seem so more or less aligned. Now that's the question is like, where's our filter there, or what's the mechanism for us to filter? But do things seem more or less aligned on something we would want to support? And then what would be the right mechanism to support them? Do we say like, let's do this campaign, let's write a white paper, let's call a congressman, or do we just say like, let's get them on the podcast and have them write some stuff so people learn about their project?
Yeah, I mean, Jason, I mean, throwing this back to you a little bit because I've been pondering this. Like when people email and say, "How do I join DO?"
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know either.
Yeah,
we often just ignore the emails, which is horrible.
And there's a really cliche, like there's a horrible. I don't really like this. Sorry for anybody who does this kind of thing, but it's like the way you join DO is, you just get out there and you do it, you live it, blah, blah, blah. No, come on. I think there has to be there has to be something more than that.
But it shouldn't be like subscribe to our newsletter either.
Right. And so maybe, I mean, this is the network effect a little bit, is like, okay, you join DO you've got to talk to people. You've got to do. That's just what I said. I don't want to make it.
But
I don't know how this works. Like
DO needs a secretary and it needs spreadsheets. So it says, I live in this place and I want to get involved. Well, we have a secretary who spends time digging through their spreadsheets of like other DO people who are in their area that they can link up with. And
although no spreadsheets,
then,
right?
do we want to get spreadsheets and a secretary?
Well, that's always the
question. It needs to be like mailers, like you would get in the back of a magazine in the 50s, where you're like, join the American Society of like robot engineer model builder guys, and then you like send in $5 and they send you a certificate, and like you never hear from them again. We could do that.
I also think we should actually be thinking about analog solutions to a lot of this stuff. Like, because I love analog things. I love that our events have been Chatham House rules and that like nobody's like writing and promoting like really constantly about these events. It's just kind of like, well, if you were there, you know what happened. And then actually the word of mouth is much more powerful. And then the experience of it just being like in person and it's not live streamed. It just is, it happened there and everyone was able to be goofy and like have fun and maybe drink too much. And then it ended. And I like that. So I think we should always I always tend to lean toward like, is there an analog solution to this first?
Yeah, this isn't exactly analog, but I mean, the idea that I've expressed for a while, and I don't know if it's been very successful, is, try and get more people bought in to DO in terms of start, hosting an event or hosting a podcast, right? And, so like oftentimes when I'm interviewing somebody from some region of the country, I'm like, hey, if there's anybody that you want to talk to, especially locally, I don't know if I always make that explicit, maybe I should, but especially locally, you can host a podcast or you can co-host with me and I'll co-host with you and you can kind of bring them in. So it's like, how do we get more people to take ownership of the process in a decentralized way?
Yeah.
right? But the idea of like being a secretary just sounds an unpaid secretary just sounds horrible. I'd
Yeah.
rather be outside in my garden.
Yeah.
Well,
So how can we get more people bought in?
This brings up a good point, I think, going back to what we talked about earlier, which is like a podcast is not an analog solution. A Substack is not an analog solution.
That's true, right?
But they are just different, deeper, and for certain people, just way more accessible ways of engaging with stuff than Twitter is. And like, I think this is a bigger conversation, but I think there's going to have to be at some point some conversation about how we move this whole thing like off of a Twitter centric.
Yeah.
Like, and I even doing that, I think would open it up to a lot of people who just can't get out there and chip back. If I didn't have a public profile, I mean, I've got fewer followers than both of y'all. And I live in public my job is to live in public. Like I can't do that thing. And I assume there are a lot of people like me.
Oh,
like
yeah.
A lot of people who just scared to tweet every time because I don't like the hate. I don't like when people get mad at me. That's not my thing. And so if we're cutting out the 90% of people in the world who aren't
on Twitter constantly, right?
We'll get mad at them.
Yeah.
That's not great. And I think that's not to say that this was approached in the wrong way in the first place. Like Twitter was like amazing in this like kind of crazy stew where it was the only place you could talk for a while and stuff like that. I think for me, like having people feel like they really can write for the Substack and stuff, like that takes work off our backs. Like having somebody be like, I want to throw a camp out in wherever, that takes work off our backs. Having somebody do a pod instead of you, Jason, that takes work off our backs. That's actually good. And I think that makes us very different than a lot of things where it's like, wait, what do you mean? Like, no, I run this thing. You can't do the thing because then I won't run it. Like, I don't think any of us feels that way.
No.
But there is very much like a hierarchy of cool kids that arose on Twitter. And if it is only word of mouth from cool kids that know people on Twitter, then it's great to get closed event with your friends. That's cool, but that's not building the network.
No, and actually, like some of the people I met at this last one event with Paul Kingsnorth and Matt Crawford heard about it through Kingsnorth Substack, and they were people who were not on Twitter at all, and they're like so cool, amazing, like hardworking, have like regenerative farms or like a traditional mason and all these different like super cool people, and so like I just feel like there is actually a pretty interesting and widespread network out there that we're not tapping into yet, that I'd like to tap into somehow without it becoming like seeing like a state where you're just like, put yourself on a map, so that now the feds can raid all of your houses, it's like, there's such a balance there. Where
we should make a big database of everyone involved in DO. This will be a great idea in the next 10 years. We'll be fine.
And like literally thinking historically, like these are like the dissidents because they're like, being resilient and self-sufficient. It's actually worth noting that 2 years ago, I think it was 2021, I was sitting in Uruguay tweeting about Doomer Optimism camps, and like 5 formed because I was sitting inviting people to organize themselves around this concept. And like I think that's a really, really important like thing that happened and could continue to happen if I was like just sitting there being like, let's do, if we had like funding and my main job was like, let's invite people to organize themselves and find out other ways to reach out to people other than, other than Twitter and, what are your local people who do like regen ag and alternative stuff, like they kind of know each other locally. They typically tend to, or like, tell other people at your farmer's market, we're going to do this thing. And so like building out these networks by invitation, but we're sort of a clearinghouse of like, people kind of know what it is because it's coming through us type thing.
Yeah. I mean, my question would be, when are we going to have our first real scandal? And not like saying something spicy on Twitter, but like there's an event that's loosely associated where somebody is harmed or something, and it becomes like,
right.
And then it's like, well, we didn't have enough oversight, right?
I know.
That's probably inevitable. I think that's probably the better approach, like on net, but that kind of thing is also inevitable. Like how much we want to be a brand that people can adopt in order to have permission, which they didn't need, but in order to have permission to do, something that would be really fulfilling for
But
themselves.
then you're kind of like responsible for what happens under that banner,
Right.
kind of.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think about that concern. I thought about this like several times with the events and talking to Ashley, and as people can probably guess, like people are always there's just like a lot of people out there with too much money, and they're like, so how do I fund DO, right? And you're like, well, I don't know how you fund DO because there's no thing to fund. Like there's no structure, right? And then the minute you make the structure, then people are mad about what the structure does, right?
Yeah.
And so like even if somebody wanted to cut a check to give all of us, the whole network, like everybody's going to get rich off this, and we're all going to be able to buy our own beautiful farm, and it'll be paradise. Like there's going to be somebody who cashes that check and distributes it, and then all hell will break loose, right? And candidly, I do not know how to solve that problem. I mean, this is like the model of like Urbit, right? This is like the model of like crypto, like maximalist. There's like some technological solution to this like pervasive human problem. I tend to think there probably isn't. I tend to think probably like there's going to be a core gang of people who are more doing stuff associated with the DO name than other people, and that if something bad happens, hell will rain down on that group of people, whether or not they're a 501c3 or not. So I think it's like kind of immaterial. But oh yeah, go ahead.
And I think though we shouldn't kid ourselves either. Like most of the people that we say interview on the podcast, they don't identify as being DO. They're just people who were invited on a podcast, right? And and that's
it's not an identity though, It
exactly. It's a structure,
it's like kind of
loosely held structure of feeling. Right.
Yeah. And that's like, such a good thing. That's such it's like we're not the people who are putting Doomer Optimism like people put like anarcho-communist in their Twitter bios and saying like this is the thing that defines me, right?
Yeah.
This is the thing that brings some people together, which takes a great burden and weight off of it. Like
right. We've all been in enough leftist rooms where once you put the label on, it just becomes a cudgel. I have
correct me if I'm wrong, but just thinking this through, like for stuff that is very, very important in people's lives, which I think this is to a lot of people, but not core to their like identity and self-labeling and mechanisms like that, like a Rotary Club. Like my grandpa was in the Elks.
Yep.
You never heard one thing about drama at the Elks. He didn't really, it just wasn't that big of a deal. Like it was like, we want to go, and if stuff's going wrong, it is what it is. Like, and this shapes his whole social world, not him per se, but a lot of people involved in the Elks and things like that. Shapes their whole social world, shapes their whole like vision of their community. But like, there's never anything involved in a lot of those places the way that like all of this politics just like immediately devolves into hellscapes. And I think if nothing else as a spirit or as like I'm using fraternal because these are fraternal organizations, but like as a fraternal sort of bringing together mechanism that is not, it doesn't have to be anything beyond that. That's a good model. And that can have an organizational structure just to smooth things out, but it doesn't have to be your life. And I think that's what's tearing people apart.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if it's just sort of voluntary and fraternal and kind of people are coming to it because they're attracted to the sense of it, the vibe of it. Like, yeah, I totally agree. I think it's kind of self-selecting. I also have talked to Peter Allen about something we've already kind of done intuitively, which is we have sort of vetted an inner core of people who we've trusted, who we've like worked with through time and who we know are like really good people and we would trust to be, close collaborators. And everybody does this in their life, like people who they resonate with more and want to be closer friends with. And they just kind of, build that relationship to be a little bit deeper through time. And then the sort of further out, there's less vetting, but then there's sort of less responsibility and onus on us to like, have complete control over everything that's happening in their, project or whatever. I'm wondering, like, if we had talked about this a little bit off the podcast, but if we were to go to a guy for funding, later tonight.
For the record, that is not why I'm going to that.
But no, there's like a bunch.
Veto that in any case.
No, yeah, okay. So, but anyways, like there actually have been literal like billionaires who have approached us in some capacity or another and said like, how can we fund this? Like it seems cool, but you got to run it as like a venture capital thing or what? And it's just like, this isn't that, you know? And so if we were to seek funding, what would it look like for you guys? I have kind of an answer sketched out in the back of my head, which is like maybe 1 year of funding on a certain like, you know, kind of narrow scope of like advance the events, you know, make the Substack and podcast slightly more professionalized, you know, start building out like a network, a known network that's in sort of internal to us, like help other people with their events, and then see if it goes well and then have like a 3 or 5 year bigger vision. And to me, that's always like, it's not like a big top-down political thing as much as like a facilitating bottom-up organization that already wants to happen. That's the vision for the thing for me.
First priority would be getting Griffin paid.
What's that?
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's things like. Oh, go ahead, Jason. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over.
No, I mean, I don't, you know, like there's certain people, well, I mean, he's kind of an archetypical example here of like just somebody who's just doing the work in the background, is not, is not really seeking attention, at least not right now. You know, we've encouraged him to like come out of the shadows a little bit, do a podcast and stuff. Maybe he will, but you know, he's somebody who puts some serious time into like your video, your recent podcast, James. Like he did a really good little kind of like video montage of that took some effort, right? He definitely probably put some hours into that, and I can see people like that or in the sphere of event organizing who we just professionalize certain aspects of it a little bit, right? We dedicated people who would want to be doing it anyway, but now can afford to do it more, right? And I mean, I can see him going full time, for example, like putting a lot of production effort into these things like that could broaden our reach quite a bit, right? Those are usually the highest viewed content on YouTube, for example, the short clips. But the same thing for our secretary, right? That helps coordinate events. So Ashley, I think you've been our de facto secretary, but you have what, 2 full-time jobs that.
Yeah, although one of them is ending like in a couple of weeks, my postdoc.
Just one full-time job and 3 kids. Wow, you're gonna have all the time in the world.
Yeah. James.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I was jumping in to say that what was I going to say? Oh, it was just I was going to say that I love that we're actually having this conversation in public. Like that already is a good sign to me. Like this is stuff that people don't talk about in public, and I think that's a big problem with a lot of things. People may laugh at us for talking about it in public and not even knowing what we think, but
That's good.
I was just thinking back to like, okay, true heads of this podcast will remember that I work or used to manage a native plant nursery in Southern California. And, something happened when people who had been volunteering there for years started getting paid $1,000 a month. Like the place transformed. And it was beautiful. And like stuff was spick and span, and the point of sale worked, and like you could suddenly like the credit card machine worked every weekend. Like it was like, and that really, it was like not a huge outlay for a going concern. You had to take a risk and you had to get some funding, but then once you did that, you're like, oh, now we're a nursery. Okay. Now this can do stuff. And then suddenly you're like, okay, let's do the restoration project. Okay, let's do this thing. Like, and it takes that little jump. I do think that something like that, I mean, speaking of like people who are working behind the scenes doing producing and like for free, like imagine what they can do with a little compensation, right?
Yeah.
Suddenly like, and the events, I mean, imagine, and you had asked Ashley earlier, like what we actually just thought about the funding. Like I'm maybe over bullish about this, but like this thing, what this thing has become is what there's just how many billionaires are there in America? Way too many, like a lot. And they're always like, they just have a guy out there. Every one of them has a guy out there who's trying to create something like this. They're always like, go find me, give me, spend my money so you create something like, and then none of them work. And so in terms of like proof of concept, like this is already just like the kind of thing that like a billionaire wishes they could give money to. And that is why billionaires will feel us out. That is why you get these like funny little emails from that guy who sends the money. And mostly we've, just like not done that. I fully think that all of us would have great reservations about give any name, whoever it is. I'm just speaking hypothetically. Like there's going to be reservations. There's going to be reservations about whatever foundation, anything that it could be. There will have to be other conversations because it's just too speculative and there's too many nasty people in the universe.
Yeah. And we're trying to maintain such independence, and that's always a challenge. Like, because we have a pretty strong vision, and the reason we are capable of pulling off what we've pulled off is because we've been all very pig-headed and very intentional and like curatorial on this, and it's not because we are like, let me make this billionaire happy and proud based on their vision. Like, it's not their vision, it's our vision. That's the reason it's working. So like every time you take money, like you owe somebody something, unless they buy into your vision and you like sell it appropriately.
This could be the Doomer Optimism's like Institute of Think Tank Studies, like headquartered, in Omaha tomorrow. Like just plug and play. Everybody would make $120,000. Somebody in Omaha really wants to have some smart people move there. The boo would be plug and play. And I think it's to our credit that none of us is that interested in that. I don't think.
No.
Correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, the mechanism. Sorry, that was my only point really was that.
Yeah, I mean, I think
and like
maintaining independence is like going to be a key, or you find somebody who's willing to just give over like seed funding toward like grant funding toward this thing because they totally like get the vision. They get that we're at this point in history. They get that we're trying to do something good to like prefigure some of the potential horrors down the line and to like arm ourselves against the bad things. And they just kind of agree that that's what.
Edit that part out.
But
just have to arm ourselves. Speaking of all the bad things, guys, I actually have to go watch this election now.
Okay.
I'm really sorry. But I would just wanted to throw a closing note that
okay, let's take some
super cool that we're discussing this like in public together, like, and hopefully bringing other people into that as well. Like that feels like a good sign for a thing that has clearly taken off. Like whatever else we think of it, it has clearly taken a life of its own. And
yeah,
I don't know. It's been very special in my life. I would put
yeah. Yeah. Jason, last thoughts?
I mean, my mind's kind of muddled right now. There's a lot of competing thoughts, but I guess I'll just say that, James, I've admired you from afar, and I appreciate the work that you do. And it's nice to meet you in person finally, and more of these conversations.
Yeah. We'll have more conversations. We're gonna let James go, but like it's just very heartwarming to see you two meet each other. This is how I feel at every event. I'm like, I like you and I like you, and you two need to know each other. And when they do, it's just like there is this network effect thing happening. So yeah, we'll just send this audio or this recording to billionaires and tell us, like, give us money. Problem solved.
That's what we decided. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Jason, great to meet you.
Election night.
Good to meet you.
Ashley, good to, yeah.
All right. Bye.
What's going to happen? Bye.
What's going to happen?
Yeah.